They say that in Victorian London, the walls of the great manors had ears, but at the Blackwood estate, the walls had secrets that could destroy a dynasty. No one looked twice at the scullery maid with the raw, blistered hands. To the high society guests dining upstairs, she was invisible, a ghost scrubbing their grease. But Alenia wasn't just a servant. She was a woman hiding a stolen past and a name that had been erased from history. She thought she was safe in the shadows until the Duke walked in, saw her tears, and asked a question that would bring the entire house of cards crashing down. This is the true story of betrayal, identity, and the night the Duke found his equal in the dishwater. The water in the copper basin was scalding hot, gray with the grease of 100 plates, and smelling of old mutton and lye soap. Alenia Vance plunged her hands back into the murky depths, biting her lip to keep from crying out. The coarse scrubbing brush had long ago rubbed the skin of her knuckles raw, leaving them red and cracked. It was nearly midnight at the Blackwood estate. Upstairs, the sounds of violins and high-pitched laughter drifted down through the floorboards like a taunt. Duke Albert Blackwood was hosting his annual Autumn Ball, an event that drew the wealthiest aristocrats from across England. But down here, in the suffocating heat of the scullery, there was no music. There was only the clattering of china, the shouting of the head cook, Mrs. Holloway, and the endless pile of dirty dishes. "Faster, girl!" Mrs. Holloway barked, slamming a stack of porcelain dessert plates onto the wooden counter next to Alenia. "The Duke has called for the late-night roast." "If these platters aren't clean in 5 minutes, you'll be out on the street before the clock strikes 12. "Yes, Mrs. Holloway," Alenia whispered, her voice hoarse. She scrubbed harder, her shoulders aching with a deep, throbbing pain. 2 years. It had been 2 years since she had worn silk instead of these rags. 2 years since she had danced in a ballroom rather than cleaning up the refuse of the wealthy. The memory of her father, the late Baron Vance, flashed before her eyes, his kind smile, the smell of his pipe tobacco, the safety of her childhood home. A single, hot tear escaped her eye. It trailed through the soot on her cheek and dripped into the dishwater. Then another came, and another. She tried to stifle a sob, bowing her head low over the sink, her body trembling. The exhaustion was finally breaking her. She wasn't weeping for the work. She was weeping for the life that had been stolen from her, for the injustice that burned in her chest like a coal. Suddenly, the heavy oak door to the kitchen swung open. The chatter of the other servants died instantly. Even Mrs. Holloway froze, a ladle suspended, in midair. Standing in the doorway was Duke Albert Blackwood. He was a man who seemed to suck the oxygen out of a room. Tall, broad-shouldered, and dressed in impeccable evening wear, he looked like a dark prince from a storybook. But his face was hard, his jaw set in a line of boredom and irritation. He was known throughout London as the Ice Duke, a man who had inherited a massive fortune but had no heart to share it with. He had come down personally to inspect the delay with the roast, escaping the suffocating attention of the debutantes upstairs. His sharp, blue eyes swept over the kitchen, causing the sous-chefs to bow hastily. He ignored them, walking with a predatory grace toward the scullery, drawn perhaps by the only sound that dared to break the silence, a stifled sniffle. Alenia sensed his presence before she saw him. The scent of sandalwood and expensive brandy cut through the smell of grease. She froze, keeping her head down, praying he would just yell at Mrs. Holloway and leave. She could not let him see her face. If he saw her, but the footsteps stopped right beside her. "Leave us," the Duke said. His voice was low, a deep baritone that vibrated through the stone floor. "Your Grace," Mrs. Holloway stammered. "This girl is just—" I said, "Leave us. Everyone. Now." There was a frantic scrambling as the kitchen staff fled into the pantry and the corridors, terrified of the Duke's temper. In seconds, the great kitchen was silent, save for the crackling of the hearth fire and the dripping of the faucet. Alenia gripped the edge of the sink, her knuckles white. She stared at the soapy water, refusing to look up. "Look at me," the Duke commanded. It wasn't a shout. It was a simple instruction that brooked no refusal. Slowly, painfully, Elenya lifted her head. She turned to face one of the most powerful men in England. Her face was smudged with coal dust, her hair escaping its messy bun, her eyes red-rimmed and swollen. Albert Blackwood stared at her. He didn't look at her rags or her dirty hands. He looked straight into her eyes, which were a startling, piercing green, a color that didn't belong in a scullery. He tilted his head slightly, his expression shifting from irritation to a confusing mixture of curiosity and recognition. He took a step closer, invading her space. He reached out, his gloved hand hovering near her face before he pulled it back, as if remembering himself. "You are crying," he stated, his voice devoid of the cruelty she expected. "It is nothing, Your Grace," Elenya whispered, dipping a curtsy that was too graceful, too perfect for a common maid. "The onions, the smoke." "There are no onions here, and the fire is burning clean." Albert cut her off. He leaned against the heavy wooden counter, crossing his arms. He looked out of place among the copper pots, yet he commanded the space entirely. "I came down here to demand why my roast was late. Instead, I find a girl weeping into my fine china as if her world has ended." He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a whisper that sent a shiver down her spine. "Tell me, little maid, who broke your heart?" Elenya's breath hitched. She looked at him, panic rising in her throat. He wasn't asking about a lover. He was asking about her soul. He saw too much. "No one, Your Grace," she lied, turning back to the sink. "Just a broken plate, a clumsy mistake." "You lie with the elegance of a courtier," Albert observed, his eyes narrowing. He reached out and grabbed her left hand, the one she had been trying to hide. He pulled it out of the water. It was wet, soapy, and trembling. But he wasn't looking at the blisters. He was looking at her ring finger. There, visible only as a faint, pale indentation on her skin, was the mark where a signet ring had once sat. A ring she had been forced to sell 2 years ago. "A ring was worn here for many years," Albert murmured, thumbing the pale skin, "and recently removed." "You are not who you claim to be, are you?" Elenya yanked her hand back, terrified. "I am just Elenya, sir, just a washer girl." "We shall see," Albert said, straightening up. The cold mask returned to his face, but his eyes were burning with a new intensity. "Finish the dishes, Elenya, but do not think you can hide in the steam forever. I hate mysteries, and I intend to solve this one." He turned on his heel and strode out of the kitchen, leaving Elenya clutching her chest, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. He had seen the mark. He had seen the grace in her curtsy. The Duke knew. And that was more dangerous than any debt collector or cruel stepmother. To understand why Elenya Vance was trembling in a scullery, scrubbing plates for a man she once might have been introduced to at a garden party, we have to go back to the winter of 1892. This is the part of the story where history reveals its cruel teeth, where real life proves stranger and darker than fiction. Elenya was born to Baron Frederick Vance, a man of modest wealth but impeccable reputation. They lived in Oakwood Manor, a beautiful estate in the countryside of Surrey. Her mother had passed when Elenya was young, and for years it was just her and her father. They were happy. Elenya was educated not just in needlepoint and piano, but in history, literature, and the management of an estate. But Baron Vance made a fatal error, one common to men of his time who are too trusting. He fell in love with a woman named Lady Bealora. Bealora was a widow with a daughter of her own, Clara. On the surface, Bealora was charming, pious, and attentive, but behind closed doors, she was a viper waiting to strike. She saw the Baron not as a husband, but as a bank vault, and she saw Elenya not as a daughter, but as an obstacle. The tragedy struck on a rainy November night. Baron Vance was returning from a business trip in London when his carriage overturned on a washed-out bridge. He was killed instantly. Elenya was 19 years old. She was devastated, blinded by grief. She didn't see the knife coming until it was already twisted in her back. Before the Baron's body was even cold, Lady Bealora made her move. She produced a new will. It was a forgery, crudely done, but effective enough to fool the local magistrate, who was known to be in debt to Bealora's own family. The document stated that due to Alenia's mental instability, a complete fabrication, the entire estate, the fortune, and the title deeds were to be left to Lady Bealora, with Alenia to be committed to a sanitarium for her own safety. Alenia remembered the morning the solicitor read the will. She had stood up, her face pale, screaming that it was a lie, that her father would never do such a thing. "Sit down, child," Bealora had said, her voice dripping with faux sympathy while her eyes gleamed with malice. "You are hysterical, just as your father feared." Clara, her stepsister, had sat in the corner, smirking behind a lace fan. Clara, who envied Alenia's beauty and her natural grace, was finally getting what she wanted: Alenia's room, Alenia's jewels, and Alenia's life. That night, Alenia overheard Bealora speaking to the doctor they had bribed to take her away to the asylum. "Make sure she is sedated," Bealora had whispered. "I don't want her coming back. Ever." Alenia knew she had only one choice. She couldn't fight them in court. She had no money, and no male relatives to speak for her. If she stayed, she would disappear into a madhouse. So Alenia Vance ran. She packed a small bag with the few things she could hide: a locket with her parents' picture and her father's gold signet ring. She climbed out of her bedroom window, sliding down the trellis in the pouring rain, tearing her silk dress, scraping her hands. She ran into the woods, leaving behind Oakwood Manor, her name, and her future. She arrived in London 3 days later, starving and anonymous. She sold the signet ring to a pawn shop in the East End just to buy bread and a room in a boarding house. That was the day Alenia Vance died, and Ellie, the kitchen maid, was born. For 2 years she moved from house to house, working the lowest jobs, keeping her head down. She learned to hide her accent, to rough up her hands, to make herself invisible. She eventually found work at the Blackwood estate, the home of the reclusive Duke. It was the best-paying job she had found, and the sheer size of the staff meant it was easy to hide. Or so she thought. Back in the kitchen, the night of the ball, Alenia tried to steady her shaking hands. The Duke's questions still rang in her ears. "Who broke your heart?" She couldn't let him find out. If Duke Albert investigated her, he would find the records of a mad girl who had run away. He might send her back to Bealora. The law was always on the side of the parents and guardians, not runaway daughters. "Hey, you dreaming again?" Alenia jumped. It was Thomas, the stable boy who often brought the firewood into the kitchen. He was a kind lad, with a mop of red hair and a crush on Alenia that everyone but Alenia noticed. "Sorry, Thomas," she murmured, grabbing a towel. "You look like you've seen a ghost," Thomas said, dropping a bundle of logs near the hearth. "Was it the master?" "I saw him storming out. He looked like thunder. He just wanted to know about the roast." Alenia lied. "Well, watch out." Thomas lowered his voice. "I heard the valet talking. The Duke is in a foul mood because of his fiancée." Alenia froze. "Fiancée?" "Aye. Lady Genevieve. She's upstairs right now. A real piece of work, that one. Rich as Croesus, but mean as a snake. Rumor is, the Duke doesn't want to marry her, but it's some sort of family contract." Alenia felt a strange pang in her chest. Why did she care? The Duke was a world away. He was engaged to a lady. She was a dishwasher. But as she scrubbed the next plate, she couldn't help but remember the way his thumb had brushed the empty spot on her finger. He had been gentle. For a split second, the Ice Duke had been warm. Upstairs in the ballroom, the music swelled. Duke Albert Blackwood stood on the balcony, overlooking the swirling dancers. Lady Genevieve, a stunning woman with cold eyes and a dress of crimson silk, glided up to him. "Albert," she purred, linking her arm through his. "You disappeared. The guests are asking for you." "I had a matter to attend to," Albert said distantly, pulling his arm away gently but firmly. "A matter? In the kitchens?" Genevieve laughed, a harsh, tinkling sound. "Don't tell me you're checking the silverware." "Something like that," Albert murmured. He looked down at his own hand, remembering the feel of the maid's trembling fingers. He had seen thousands of women, debutantes, heiresses, queens, but none of them had eyes like that scullery maid, eyes that held a tragedy deep enough to drown in. He turned to his head of security, a man named Mr. Silas Thorne. "Silas," Albert said quietly. "Your Grace?" "The new scullery maid, the one with the dark hair. Find out who hired her. Find out where she came from." "Is something wrong, sir?" "No," Albert said, his eyes darkening. "But she is not a maid. She is a puzzle, and I want the pieces put together by morning." Down in the kitchen, Elenya felt a chill run down her spine that had nothing to do with the drafty door. The game had begun. She just didn't know that her opponent was the one man who could either save her or destroy her completely. The following morning, the Blackwood estate was recovering from the chaos of the ball. The scullery was a mountain of dirty glassware, but Mrs. Holloway had a different task for Elenya. "The upstairs maids are exhausted from the party," Mrs. Holloway grumbled, wiping her hands on her apron. "And the master is demanding the library be dusted before he takes his morning tea. You're small and quiet. Go up there and don't break anything. And for heaven's sake, don't speak unless spoken to." Elenya's heart skipped a beat. The library. It was the one room in the house she longed to see. Her father's library had been her sanctuary, and she hadn't held a book in her hands for 2 years. She took the feather duster and crept up the servants' stairs, emerging into the grand hallway. The house was silent, the guests sleeping off the champagne. She slipped into the library and gasped. It was a cathedral of knowledge. Floor-to-ceiling mahogany shelves were packed with leather-bound volumes. A rolling ladder rested against the far wall, and a massive fireplace dominated the room. It smelled of old paper, wax, and leather, the smell of home. Forgetting herself for a moment, Elenya moved to the desk. It was cluttered with papers, business ledgers, correspondence, and an open book. It was a volume of poetry by Lord Byron. She shouldn't touch it. She knew she shouldn't. But her fingers itched. She reached out, tracing the gold lettering on the spine. She looked down at the open page. It was "She walks in beauty." "And all that's best of dark and bright meet in her aspect and her eyes." Elenya whispered the words aloud, her voice trembling with the memory of reciting this to her father by the fire. "You have excellent pronunciation for a kitchen maid." The voice came from the shadows of a high-backed wing chair near the window. Elenya gasped, dropping the duster. She spun around, her face draining of color. Duke Albert was sitting there, a cup of tea in his hand, watching her. He was dressed informally in a smoking jacket, looking tired but alert. He had been there the whole time, silent as a panther. "Your Grace, I didn't see you," Elenya stammered, dropping into a deep curtsy. "I am so sorry to disturb you. I was sent to dust." "Stand up," Albert said, setting his cup down. He didn't sound angry. He sounded fascinated. "You were reading Byron, and you weren't stumbling over the words. Most of my staff can barely sign their own names. Where did you learn to read poetry?" Elenya's mind raced. She needed a lie, and fast. My father, sir. He was a schoolteacher in the village. He taught me a little before he died." "A schoolteacher," Albert repeated, standing up and walking toward her. "And yet, your accent shifted just now. When you were reading, you sounded like a debutante. Now you sound like a Cockney flower girl. Which one is real, Ellie?" He stopped just a foot away from her. The air between them crackled with tension. "The schoolteacher taught me to speak proper, sir," she said, keeping her eyes on the carpet. "But life on the streets teaches you to speak rough." Interpretive. Albert mused. He reached past her, picking up a letter from the desk. It was written in French. "Since your father was such a scholar, perhaps you can help me. I have a letter from a cousin in Paris. I'm afraid my French is rusty. What does this line say?" He held the paper in front of her face. It was a trap. A blatant, dangerous trap. A village schoolteacher wouldn't teach his daughter fluent French. If she translated it, She exposed herself. If she didn't, he might fire her for incompetence or lying. Elenia looked at the script. It was a simple sentence about a shipment of wine. Le vin arrivera mardi prochain. The wine will arrive next Tuesday. She looked up at him, feigning confusion. I don't know foreign tongues, Your Grace. It looks like chicken scratch to me. Albert studied her face for a long, agonizing minute. He was looking for the lie. He knew she understood it. He had seen her eyes scan the line and comprehend it before she masked her expression. You are a terrible liar, Ellie, he said softly. But you are stubborn. I like stubbornness. He tossed the letter back onto the desk. You may dust, but stay away from the desk. I don't want your chicken scratch knowledge messing up my filing system. Yes, Your Grace. Elenia turned to the shelves, her heart hammering. She started dusting furiously. One more thing, Albert said, his back turned to her as he looked out the window. Elenia froze. I am hosting a small dinner party on Friday. My fiancée, Lady Genevieve, will be there, along with a few esteemed guests from Surrey, Lady Bealora Vance and her daughter Clara. Do you know them? The duster slipped from Elenia's hand and hit the floor with a soft thud. The room spun. Bealora, Clara, here, in this house. No, sir. Elenia managed to choke out, her voice barely audible. I don't know anyone from Surrey. Pity, Albert said, his voice cold and sharp as a razor. I heard Lady Bealora is looking for a runaway relative, a stepdaughter who stole from her. I thought, perhaps, if you were from that area, you might have heard the gossip. He turned around slowly to face her. Elenia was shaking so hard she had to grab the bookshelf for support. He knew. He didn't have proof yet, but he knew. You look pale, Ellie, Albert said, walking toward the door. Take the rest of the day off. You'll need your strength for Friday. I want you serving at the table. Me? But I'm a scullery maid, she cried, panic rising. Serving meant being in the room, being seen. Mrs. Halloway says you are clumsy, Albert said, a cruel smirk playing on his lips. But I think you have the grace of a lady. Prove me right. Friday night. Don't be late. He walked out, leaving Elenia alone in the silent library. She sank to the floor, burying her face in her hands. It was a test. A cruel, twisted test. He was bringing her worst enemies to the table and forcing her to serve them. Why? Was he planning to hand her over? Or did he want to see if she would break? Friday arrived with the weight of a guillotine blade. The atmosphere in the kitchen was manic. A dinner for Lady Bealora Vance was no small affair. The woman was known for her critical nature and her high social standing. Elenia felt like a prisoner walking to the gallows. She had tried to run away the night before. She had packed her small bag and headed for the back door. But standing there, in the shadow of the stables, was Silas Thorne, the head of security. Going somewhere, Miss Ellie? He had asked, his voice gravelly. The Duke gave strict orders. No staff leaves the grounds until after the dinner. She was trapped. Now, she stood in the serving line, dressed in a crisp black uniform with a white starched apron. Mrs. Holloway had scrubbed Elenia's face and pinned her hair back so tightly it hurt. You drop one spoon, girl, and I'll have your hide, Mrs. Holloway hissed. The bell rang. Dinner was served. Elenia walked into the dining room, carrying a silver tureen of soup. The room was bathed in the warm glow of candlelight. The table was set with the finest crystal and silver. And there they were. Seated to the right of the Duke was Lady Genevieve, looking bored and beautiful, but across from her sat the nightmares of Elenia's past. Lady Bealora hadn't changed. She was wearing stiff purple silk, her face powdered white, her lips a thin line of red. She looked like a poisonous orchid. Beside her sat Clara, wearing too many jewels, her eyes darting around the room, assessing the value of everything she saw. Elenia kept her head down, her heart thumping so loudly she feared they could hear it. She moved to the side of the table, serving the soup. "So, Duke Blackwood," Beelora said, her voice smooth and grating. "We were so delighted to receive your invitation. It is rare for us to travel to London these days. The country is so much safer." "I am glad you came," Albert said. He was watching Elenya. He didn't look at his guests. His eyes were fixed on the maid's trembling hands as she ladled soup into Clara's bowl. "I have a fondness for solving mysteries. And I understand you have a mystery of your own, Lady Beelora." Beelora paused, her spoon hovering halfway to her mouth. "A mystery? I am not sure I follow." "I heard a rumor," Albert said casually, taking a sip of wine. "That you lost a daughter. A tragedy, really." Elenya's hand slipped. The ladle clattered against the side of the china bowl with a loud ping. "Careful, girl!" Clara snapped, glaring at Elenya. Elenya froze. If Clara looked up, if she looked closely, but Clara only saw a servant. She rolled her eyes and turned back to the Duke. "Oh, that," Clara said dismissively. "She wasn't really a daughter, my stepfather's child. Elenya. She was unwell." "Unwell?" Albert leaned forward. "In what way?" "Mentally," Beelora interjected, her voice lowering to a conspiratorial whisper. "The poor girl was mad. Delusions of grandeur. She thought everyone was out to get her. After her father died, she became violent. We tried to help her, to send her to a specialized facility, but she ran away in the night. Like a thief. She stole from us," Clara added, stuffing bread into her mouth. "Family heirlooms. Jewelry. She's probably dead in a ditch somewhere by now. And good riddance." Elenya felt the blood drain from her face. Violent? Thief? The lies were so bold, so practiced. She felt a wave of nausea. She wanted to scream, to throw the soup tureen at them, to tell the truth. But she couldn't. She was nobody. They were nobility. "Is that so?" Albert's voice was dangerously quiet. "A thief and a mad woman. How terrible for you to endure such a burden." "It was a trial," Beelora sighed, dabbing her mouth with a napkin. "But we persevere. We are only concerned that she might trick some unsuspecting soul with her lies." She was quite a manipulative little actress. Elenya finished serving and stepped back into the shadows, shaking uncontrollably. She caught the Duke's eye. He wasn't looking at Beelora with sympathy. He was looking at Elenya. And in his eyes, she saw something she didn't expect. Rage. But it wasn't directed at her. "Tell me, Lady Beelora," Albert said, setting his wineglass down with a deliberate clink. "If this girl, Elenya, were to be found, what would happen?" "She would be returned to our care, of course," Beelora said quickly. "She is a ward of the estate. She needs professional help." "Professional help," Albert repeated. "Or a prison cell." "The asylum is the best place for her," Beelora said coldly. "I see." Albert turned to Elenya. "Ellie, more wine for Lady Beelora. She seems to be parched." From all this storytelling, Elenya stepped forward. She had to get close to Beelora. She had to pour the wine over the woman's right shoulder. As she leaned in, the candlelight caught the side of Elenya's face. Beelora looked up. Her eyes locked onto Elenya's profile. The familiarity struck her. The arch of the nose, the shape of the chin. Beelora's eyes widened. She grabbed Elenya's wrist, her fingernails digging into the skin. "You!" Beelora hissed. The table went silent. "Mother?" Clara asked. "What is it?" Beelora pulled Elenya's arm down, forcing her to look at her. "Look at me, girl!" Elenya was paralyzed. She stared into the eyes of the woman who had ruined her life. "It's her," Beelora whispered, a cruel smile spreading across her face. "It's Elenya, hiding in the dirt where she belongs." She turned to the Duke, triumph in her voice. "Your Grace, you have harbor a fugitive. This is her. This is the thief." Clara shrieked, jumping up. "It's her! Arrest her!" Elenya yanked her arm back, the wine bottle wobbling. "No, I didn't steal anything! She's lying!" "Silence!" Beelora shouted, standing up. "How dare you speak to your betters? Duke Blackwood, I demand you call the constable immediately. This girl is my property, and she is a dangerous criminal." The room held its breath. All eyes turned to Albert. He sat calmly at the head of the table, swirling the last of his wine. He looked from the screaming Beelora to the terrified Elenya. "Silas," Albert said calmly. The doors opened, and the imposing head of security stepped in, followed by 2 footmen. "Yes, Your Grace?" "Lady Beelora claims this maid is her daughter," Albert said, standing up slowly. He towered over the table. "She claims the girl is a thief and a madwoman." "She is," Beelora cried. "Take her away!" Albert walked around the table until he stood between Beelora and Elenya. He placed a hand on Elenya's shoulder, a gesture of protection, not capture. "That is a serious accusation," Albert said, his voice dropping to a growl. "But before we call the constable, Lady Beelora, perhaps we should discuss the other rumor I heard about the Vance estate." Beelora froze. "What rumor?" "The rumor about a forged will," Albert said. The color drained from Beelora's face so fast she looked like a corpse. "And," Albert continued, "the rumor that Baron Vance's signature was witnessed by a man who had been dead for 3 years prior to the document's date." Silence. Absolute, suffocating silence. Albert looked down at Elenya. "You see, Ellie, I didn't just investigate you. I investigated them." He looked back at Beelora, his eyes burning with cold fire. "So, tell me again about the thief. Because from where I am standing, the only thieves in this room are wearing purple silk." The dining room of the Blackwood estate had transformed into a courtroom, the air thick with the scent of roasted duck and impending ruin. Lady Beelora stood trembling, her face a mask of cracked powder and fury. She looked around the table, seeking an ally, but found only cold stares. Even her daughter, Clara, had shrunk back into her chair, sensing that the ship was sinking and trying desperately to detach herself from the wreckage. "This is preposterous," Beelora shrieked, her voice cracking. "You are taking the word of a dishwasher over a lady of the realm? I will have your title for this, Blackwood. I have friends in Parliament." Duke Albert didn't blink. He walked slowly back to his chair, picked up a silver knife, and inspected it casually, as if checking for spots. "Friends in Parliament," Albert mused. "Do you mean Lord Harrington? The man who helped you liquidate the Vance stocks 3 weeks after the Baron's death, the stocks that were legally held in a trust for Elenya until her 21st birthday?" Beelora's mouth opened and closed like a fish on dry land. "I spoke to Harrington this morning," Albert continued, his voice dropping to a terrifyingly pleasant tone. "He was very eager to avoid a scandal. He gave me everything: the ledgers, the transfer dates, and the name of the forger you hired to rewrite the will." Albert signaled to Silas. The security chief stepped forward, placing a thick leather portfolio on the table. He opened it, revealing a stack of damning documents. "This," Albert said, pointing to a yellowed piece of paper, "is the affidavit from the doctor you bribed, Dr. Eris. It turns out he has a gambling debt that I was happy to pay off in exchange for the truth. He admits Elenya was never insane. He admits you paid him £500 to sign the commitment papers." Elenya stood frozen near the sideboard. Her hands were shaking so violently she had to clasp them together. Tears streamed down her face, washing away the soot and grime. He had done it. He had actually done it. He had unraveled 2 years of lies in a single day. "It's a lie!" Clara screamed, jumping up and knocking her chair over. "Mother, tell him it's a lie! Sit down, you fool!" Beelora hissed at her daughter, but the panic in her eyes was absolute. She turned to Albert, her demeanor shifting instantly from aggression to pathetic begging. She clasped her hands, her eyes wide and teary. "Your Grace, Albert, please, you must understand, we were desperate. The Baron left us with nothing. I was trying to protect Clara. Surely, as a man of status, You understand doing what is necessary for family? Family? Albert repeated, his voice dripping with disgust. He looked at Elenya, who looked small and broken in her servant's uniform. You threw your family into the street. You erased her existence. You stole her mother's jewelry and sold it for... He glanced at Clara's gaudy necklace. Paste and trinkets. Albert turned to Silas. Show them in. The double doors swung, open again. 2 uniformed constables from Scotland Yard entered, their helmets in their hands, looking grim. Beelora gasped, stumbling back against the table. No! No! You can't! Lady Beelora Vance, the lead constable announced, stepping forward with handcuffs glinting in the candlelight. You are under arrest for fraud, forgery, and the embezzlement of the Vance estate. And the daughter, Albert added coldly, accomplice to the fact. She has been wearing the stolen evidence all evening. Clara screamed as the second constable moved toward her. I didn't do anything. It was her. It was Mother. I just wanted the dresses. The scene was chaotic. Beelora began to wail, a high-pitched, keening sound that echoed off the vaulted ceiling. She lunged toward Elenya, her hands clawing the air. You ungrateful, wretched girl! Beelora screamed, spitting as the constable restrained her. I should have killed you when I had the chance. I should have. Get her out of my sight. Albert roared, slamming his hand on the table. The glasses rattled. Before I forget that I am a gentleman. The constables dragged the 2 screaming women out of the dining room. Their cries faded down the hallway, leaving a ringing silence in their wake. The dinner guests, Lady Genevieve and the few others, sat in stunned silence. Elenya felt her knees give way. The adrenaline that had held her up suddenly vanished. She crumpled toward the floor. Elenya! In a heartbeat, Albert was there. He caught her before she hit the ground, scooping her up into his arms effortlessly. He didn't care about the grease on her apron staining his expensive suit. He didn't care about the shocked gasps of his fiancée. He held her close, feeling her sob against his chest. It's over, he whispered into her hair. They can never hurt you again. Albert. Lady Genevieve stood up, her face flushed with indignation. Put that filth down. Have you lost your mind? You just arrested half your dinner party, and now you're cradling the help? Albert looked up at his fiancée. His eyes were hard as flint. She is not the help, Genevieve, he said, his voice steel. She is the rightful Baroness Vance, and she is worth 10 of you. He turned and carried Elenya out of the room, leaving his fiancée standing alone amidst the cold soup and the ruins of the evening. Elenya woke up in a bed that felt like a cloud. For a moment, she panicked, thrashing her legs, thinking she was late for the morning fires. But her hands hit silk sheets, not rough wool blankets. She sat up, gasping. She was in the Blue Room. It was one of the finest guest suites in the Blackwood estate, reserved for royalty. Sunlight streamed through the velvet curtains. She looked at her hands. They were clean. Someone had washed them while she slept. They had applied salve to her blisters. She was wearing a soft linen nightgown that smelled of lavender. The door creaked open. It wasn't Mrs. Holloway with a bucket of water. It was a young maid named Sarah, carrying a tray with a silver teapot and fresh pastries. "Morning, miss. My lady." Sarah bobbed a nervous curtsy. "Sarah, please," Elenya whispered, swinging her legs out of bed. "Don't call me that. I'm just Elenya." "The master said you are to be treated as a guest of honor," Sarah said, setting the tray down. "He's waiting for you in the conservatory. He sent these." Sarah pointed to the wardrobe. Hanging there was a dress. It wasn't the gray rags of a scullery maid. It was a morning gown of pale green muslin, simple but elegant, with lace at the cuffs. Elenya stared at it. It looked like something she would have worn in her old life. 30 minutes later, Elenya walked into the conservatory. It was a glass-walled room filled with exotic ferns and orchids. Albert was standing by the fountain, feeding the koi fish. When he heard her footsteps, he turned. He stopped. His eyes swept over her, taking in the clean hair, the dress that matched her eyes, the posture that had returned the moment she shed the servant's rags. "You look." Albert started, then cleared his throat, seemingly at a loss for words. "You look like yourself." "I don't know who myself is anymore," Alenia said honestly, walking to the edge of the fountain. She didn't bow. She didn't curtsy. They were past that. "Thank you, Your Grace." "For what you did. I can never repay you." "You don't owe me anything," Albert said. "I detest injustice, and I detest thieves." "Is that all it was?" Alenia asked, looking up at him. "A sense of justice?" Albert stepped closer. The air between them grew heavy again. "No, that wasn't all." He reached out and took her hand, the one with the healed blisters. He ran his thumb over her knuckles. "When I saw you crying in the kitchen," Albert said softly, "I saw a pain that matched my own. I have everything in the world, Alenia, money, titles, power, but I have been alone in this house for 10 years. I saw you, and for the first time, the house didn't feel empty." Alenia's heart raced. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to lean into him. But the ghost of the scullery maid was still whispering in her ear, "You are damaged goods. You have washed his floors. You are not his equal." She pulled her hand away. "I cannot stay here, Albert," she said, her voice shaking. Albert looked stunned. "What? Why?" "Bealora is gone." "The estate? It will take time to recover the funds. But I have lawyers working on restoring your title. You are safe." "I am not a baroness anymore," Alenia said, tears welling up. "Look at my hands, Albert. Look at me. I have spent 2 years being invisible. I have been spat on, starved, and worked to the bone. I don't fit in your world of silk and balls. Not anymore. I'm broken." "You are not broken," Albert said fiercely. "You are a survivor." "I need to go," Alenia insisted, backing away. "I need to find out who I am without the fear. And you have a fiancée, Lady Genevieve." At the mention of the name, Albert's face darkened. "Genevieve is a business arrangement," he said dismissively, "an arrangement I intend to break." "You can't," Alenia said. "Her father is the Earl of Hemlock. If you break the engagement, you start a war in society. You will be ostracized. I won't let you ruin your life for a dishwasher." "Alenia, stop." "No." She turned away, unable to look at him because she knew if she did, she would stay, and that would be a mistake. "I am leaving today. I have a cousin in Scotland. I will go there." "I won't let you go," Albert said, his voice rising. "You are a duke," Alenia said, turning back with a sad smile, "but you do not own me. Please, if you care for me, let me go." She ran out of the conservatory before he could stop her. Albert stood alone by the fountain, his hands clenched into fists. He had won the battle against Bealora, but he was losing the war for Alenia's heart. She was ashamed of her scars, and she thought she was saving him from social ruin. He needed to do something drastic. He needed to prove that he didn't care about society. Just then, the glass doors to the conservatory slammed open. It wasn't Alenia returning. It was Lady Genevieve. And she wasn't alone. Behind her stood her father, the Earl of Hemlock, a man known for his ruthlessness and his influence over the banks that held the Blackwood fortune. "There he is," Genevieve sneered, pointing a gloved finger at Albert. "The man who humiliated me for a servant." The Earl stepped forward, tapping his cane on the stone floor. "Blackwood, my daughter tells me you made quite a scene last night, and now I hear rumors you are chasing after a pauper wench." "She is a baroness," Albert said coldly, squaring his shoulders. "She is a scandal," the Earl barked. "Now, listen to me, boy. You will apologize to Genevieve. You will announce the wedding date by noon today." or I will pull my funding from your shipping lines. I will bankrupt this estate by the end of the week. You will be the king of nothing." Albert looked at the Earl, then at Genevieve's smug face. Then he looked at the empty doorway where Elenya had fled. He had a choice: save his fortune, or chase the woman who had washed his dishes and stolen his heart. He smiled. It was a dangerous, reckless smile. "Do it," Albert said. The Earl blinked. "Excuse me." "Pull the funding," Albert said, walking past them. "Bankrupt. Me? I don't care. But get out of my house." He stormed out of the conservatory, shouting for Silas. "Get the carriage!" Albert yelled, running toward the front doors. "She's going to the train station! We have to stop her!" But as he reached the driveway, he saw the back of a hackney cab disappearing through the estate gates. She was gone! And the sky above London began to turn a bruised, stormy purple. The real fight had just begun. The rain had turned London into a blurred painting of gray and black by the time Albert's carriage screeched to a halt outside Waterloo Station. The horses were foaming, their flanks heaving from the frantic pace. Albert leaped out before the footman could even open the door. He didn't have a hat, and his coat was flying open, a breach of etiquette that would have horrified the elite of Mayfair. He didn't care. He pushed past travelers and porters, his eyes scanning the chaotic sea of people. The station was a deafening cavern of hissing steam, blowing whistles, and the roar of industry. "The Northern Line," Albert shouted at a conductor. "The train to Scotland. Has it left?" "Just boarding now, Governor. Platform 4. Albert ran. He ran past the newspaper boys, past the flower sellers, past the weeping families saying goodbye. He reached Platform 4, just as the guard blew his whistle and the heavy iron wheels began to grind against the track. And then he saw her. Elenya was standing by the door of a third-class carriage, handing her ticket to the collector. She looked small against the backdrop of the massive steam engine. She was hesitating, looking back toward the entrance of the station one last time. "Elenya!" His voice was a raw tear in the fabric of the noise. Elenya froze. She turned, her eyes widening. She saw him sprinting down the platform, ignoring the shouts of the station master. "Albert?" she whispered. She panicked. She stepped onto the train, trying to disappear into the carriage. "Go, just go," she told the conductor. But Albert was faster. He caught the handle of the carriage door, just as the train lurched forward. He swung himself up onto the step, balancing precariously as the train began to gather speed. "Open the door, Elenya!" he shouted through the glass. "No, go back! You'll get hurt!" she cried, pressing her hands against the window. "I am not letting go." Albert yelled, the wind whipping his hair. "I will ride on the outside of this train all the way to Edinburgh if I have to. Open the door!" Terrified he would fall, Elenya threw the latch open. Albert tumbled into the vestibule, collapsing onto the floor, breathless and soaked. The train was moving now, chugging out of the station, leaving London behind. Elenya stared at him, tears streaming down her face. "You fool," she sobbed, dropping to her knees beside him. "You absolute fool. Why did—" "You come? You're ruining everything." Albert sat up, grabbing her shoulders. His grip was desperate. "You think you are saving me?" he rasped. "You think leaving me to marry a woman I despise, to live a life in a cold, empty house, is saving me?" "I am saving your legacy," Elenya argued, trying to push him away. "The Earl will destroy you. You will lose the estate. You will be a pauper, Albert, just like I was." "Let him take it," Albert said intensely, staring into her green eyes. "Let him take the estate. Let him take the title. Let him burn Blackwood Manor to the ground. I would rather sleep in the ashes with you than live in a golden cage without you." Elenya stopped fighting. She looked at this man, this powerful duke who had terrified her only days ago, now kneeling on a dirty train floor, willing to throw away a kingdom for a scullery maid. "But how will we live?" she whispered, her practical fear surfacing. Albert smiled then. It was the first time she had seen him smile with genuine, reckless joy. "My dear Elenia," he said, wiping a smudge of coal dust from her cheek, "do you really think I let the Earl of Hemlock control all my money? I'm the Ice Duke. I don't put all my ice in one cooler." He pulled her close. "I invested in American steel and South African diamonds 5 years ago. The Earl can bankrupt the estate accounts in London, but he can't touch my private holdings. I'm richer than he is. I just never told anyone because I didn't want people asking for loans." Elenia's jaw dropped. You lied to him?" "I bluffed him," Albert corrected, kissing her forehead. "And now we are going to get off at the next stop, turn around, and go home. And then I am going to introduce you to London, not as a maid, and not even as a baroness, but as the Duchess of Blackwood, blank, the aftermath." 6 months later. The scandal was, of course, delicious. The newspapers couldn't get enough of it. The Duke and the dishwasher. The Cinderella of Surrey. When Albert and Elenia returned to London, the Earl of Hemlock tried to make good on his threat. He pulled his funding. He publicly denounced Albert. He expected the Duke to come crawling back, begging for forgiveness. Instead, Albert bought the Earl's bank. It was a move of financial savagery that became legendary in the city of London. With his American fortune, Albert acquired the controlling interest in the Earl's primary lending institution. He didn't ruin the Earl. He simply made him irrelevant. But the sweetest victory was not financial. The wedding took place in the spring. It was not held in a stuffy cathedral, but in the gardens of the Blackwood estate. The guest list was eclectic. There were lords and ladies, yes, because curiosity had gotten the better of them. But in the front row, dressed in their Sunday best, sat Mrs. Halloway the cook, Thomas the stable boy, and Sarah the maid. When Elenia walked down the aisle, she didn't wear diamonds. She wore a simple string of pearls, a gift from Albert to replace the ones her stepmother had stolen. And, speaking of Lady Bealora and Clara, fate, or perhaps hard karma, had found them. The trial had been swift. The forgery was too clumsy. The testimony of the bribed doctor too damning. Bealora was sentenced to 10 years in prison for fraud and embezzlement. Clara, due to her youth, avoided prison, but was stripped of her social standing. Penniless and shunned by the society she worshipped, Clara was last heard of working as a seamstress in a factory in Manchester, sewing hems for 12 hours a day. During the reception, as the sun set over the estate, Albert found Elenia standing on the balcony, looking out over the grounds. She was no longer the frightened girl scrubbing plates. She was radiant, powerful, and loved. "What are you thinking about?" Albert asked, wrapping his arms around her waist. Elenia leaned back against him. "I was thinking about the kitchen," she said softly. "About that night you walked in." "I was looking for a roast," Albert teased. "And what did you find?" Albert turned her around so he could look into her eyes, the eyes that had haunted him from the first moment. "I found the only thing that matters," he said. "I found the truth." Below them, the music started. It was a waltz. "May I have this dance, Mrs. Blackwood?" Albert asked, bowing low. Elenia curtsied, deep and graceful, just as she had done in the scullery. "You may, Your Grace." And there, under the stars, the Duke and the scullery maid danced, proving once and for all that while titles are inherited, nobility is earned, and true love can bloom even in the grayest of dishwater. And that is the incredible, true-life-inspired story of Elenia and Duke Albert. From the lowest point in the scullery to the heights of high society, Elenia proved that your circumstances do not define your worth. Bealora and Clara learned the hard way that karma has a long memory, and it always collects its debts in the end. What did you think of Albert's decision on the train? Would you have risked everything for love, or was he reckless to ignore the Earl's threats? And do you think Bealora's punishment was severe enough for what she did to an orphan? I want to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Let's get a debate going. If this story moved you, please hit that like button. It helps the channel so much. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss another dramatic tale of love, betrayal, and redemption. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next story.